Hi, this is Paul. I got an email this morning from our Sam about a New York Times piece that he thought I would be interested in, and he was very right. This is partly the benefit of building a community, because what you do is you train all the people around you to be interested in the same salience hierarchies that you have, and we actually, as a community, to then begin to work on similar things. So this article in the New York Times, The Empty Religions of Instagram, How Influencers Become Our Moral Authorities. And this is religions that aren't a religion. Now, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about religions and institutions. The article on how the civil rights movement, at least in the white version, for white mainliners, disrupted the mainline church. And so we've seen it basically bust out of the walls of the church. Now, Leigh Stein is the author. On Instagram, I follow 700 people, mostly women. 100 of these women follow Glennon Doyle, whose memoir Untamed has been on the Times bestseller list for 51 weeks. Fans of Ms. Doyle's gospel, an accessible combination of self-care, activism, and tongue-in-cheek Christianity. Jesus loves me, this I know, for he gave me Lexapro. I don't even know what Lexapro is. Can worship at any time or day or night at the electric church of her Instagram feed. By replacing the rigid dogma of religion with confessional lingua franca of social media, Ms. Doyle has become a charismatic preacher for women like me who aren't even religious. Okay, so right there we have, once again, the question of the definition of religion. And again, religion in the post-celebrity atheist, new atheist sphere is something that involves supernatural things. It's the modernist sphere. 22% of millennials are now non-affiliated with specific religions. They are known as the Religious Nuns, N-O-N-E-S. The Pew Research Center found the number of nuns in the population as a whole increased 9 percentage points from 2009 to 2019. The main reason that nuns are unaffiliated are that they question religious teaching, or they don't like church's stance on social issues. And any pastor that is dealing with, usually pastor from a traditional church that is dealing with urban areas. So in other words, if you are a religious minority in your community with respect to any of your social issues, this is going to be a real issue, especially because a lot of these conservative churches are evangelistic, which means that the stuff they're selling, the community has pre-rejected. Okay? But are we truly non-religious, or are our belief systems too bespoke to appear on a list of major religions in a Pew phone survey? Many millennials who have turned their backs on religious traditions because it isn't sufficiently diverse or inclusive and have found alternative scriptures online. Our new belief system is a blend of left-wing political orthodoxy, intersectional femininity, self-optimization, therapy, wellness, astrology, and Dolly Parton. And we found a different kind of clergy, personal growth influencers, women like Ms. Doyle, who offers nuns like us permission, validation, and community on demand at a time when it's nearly impossible to take communion in person. We don't even have to put down our phones. In February, Ms. Doyle posted a virtual sermon to her followers on Instagram, encouraging them to embrace quitting as a spiritual practice, apparently not quitting Instagram. More than 100,000 people of her congregation liked it. Followers responded with prayer-raised emojis, God bless yous, and hallelujah, sister. I spoke to Kimberly Schiano, a 31-year-old health practitioner on Long Island who found Glennon Doyle via her Discovery feed. Ms. Schiano has followed a spiritual path that often may sound familiar to other nuns. She grew up Roman Catholic, but she became alienated from her faith by what she saw as the church's hypocrisy. In her 20s, she studied yoga and Eastern philosophy. During a year when she lost a job, a 10-year relationship, and her grandmother, the message she absorbed from Ms. Doyle helped sustain her. It's okay not to be okay. Ms. Doyle and other quasi-spiritual influencers are the latest iteration of an American institution that has been around since the second half of the 20th century, the televangelist. And then she goes into some of that history. And she talks about the pandemic. I was once one of those millennials who made politics her religion. I lasted 3 years as a feminist activist and organizer before I burned out in 2017. That's when I began noticing how many wellness programs were marketed to women in pain, and how the social media industry relies on keeping us outraged and engaged. It's no wonder we're seeking relief. I have survived the pandemic so far by performing the role of tough cookie and shielding myself from cynicism. The only times I cried have been with cynicism. Excuse me, big difference. The only times I cried have been when religion has punctured the bubble. Religion has punctured the bubble. How do we, what do we notice as being religious? I cried when Reverend Raphael Warnock spoke at John Lewis's funeral. I cried when Garth Brooks sang Amazing Grace a cappella at the Biden inauguration. I've hardly prayed to God since I was a teenager, but the pandemic has cracked open inside me a profound yearning for reverence, humility, and awe. I have an overdraft on my outrage account. I want moral authority from someone who isn't shilling a memoir or calling out her enemies on social media for clout. Left-wing secular millennials may follow politics devoutly, but the women we've chosen as our moral leaders aren't challenging us to ask fundamental questions that leaders of faith have been wrestling with for thousands of years. Why are we here? Why do we suffer? What should we believe in beyond the limits of our puny selfhood? The whole economy of Instagram is based on thinking about ourselves, posting about ourselves, and working on ourselves. My mom is an influencer in the old school sense. At 72, she still works as a full-time psychotherapist. She's a lay minister at her church, probably a mainline church, but I don't know. And she fills her time with volunteer work. Her sermons are a combination of therapeutic tips, references to current events, and lessons from Scripture, Scripture about having compassion for the other, even during times of intense polarization. I preach about that. I told her that I find myself craving role models at my age who are not only righteous crusaders, but also humble and merciful, and that I'm not finding them where I live, online. Referring to the influencers who have filled the void religious faith has left for people like me. She said, they might inspire you to live your best life, but not make the best use of your life. I thought of Ms. Shiano, who was following Ms. Doyle for solace during the dark period. Even though Ms. Shiano doesn't see Ms. Doyle as a neo-religious leader, I was struck by the vulnerable comment she left on one of Ms. Doyle's Instagram posts in which she unloaded the litany of hardships she'd experienced last year. I noticed it went unanswered. A confession without a confessor. Liability of any internet guru. There's a chasm between the vast scope of our needs and what influencers can provide. We're looking for guidance in the wrong places. Instead of helping us to engage with our most important questions, our screens might be distracting us from them. Maybe we actually need to go to something like church. Contrary to what you might have seen on Instagram, our purpose is not to optimize one wild and precious life. It's time to search for meaning beyond the electric church that helps keep us addicted to our phones and alienated from our closest kin. Wow. So, of course, I'm a digger. And where am I going to dig but YouTube? Has she done a video? Why, yes, she has. Where? bloggingheads.tv. You know, I think I'm on a collision course with Robert Wright. Because I remember when I started making videos, I noted, well, two of my go-to guys, Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, they're on Blogging Heads TV. I've watched a number of videos with Robert Wright, who also has Meaning of Life TV online. Now, I think mostly because of Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, Blogging Heads, which used to be around maybe 10,000 subs, has peaked up to 43,000 subs. But interesting that they're here in this space. Well, let's have a listen.
Hi, I'm Kat Rosenfield.
And I'm Phoebe Maltzbo.
And of course, anybody who's been around certain Buddhist-y, yogi, these kinds of things, what's that little bell that they start with?
And we are Feminine Chaos.
Here today with Leigh Stein, the author.
I'm going to have to adjust that sound. Hang on.
Self-Care. It comes out on, I think, June 30th. Is that correct? Yep. And also the recent author of an extremely viral Medium essay called The End of the Girl Boss is Here. Needless to say, all of these are topics.
So, of course, I had to look up The End of the Girl Boss, too, which is on Medium, and I'll put all these links below. Very interesting piece. She, leaned in with Sheryl Sandberg, and they talk about this in the conversation. Basically, Hillary Clinton was sort of peak, but then, of course, George Floyd came along, and right away you're dealing with a hierarchy. Because are you going to be anti-racist, or are you going to be anti-patriarchy? There can only be one thing at the top of the hierarchy. And this, of course, to me, always swings back to Jordan Peterson's comment in the first biblical series. Part of what Christianity does is put something above the hierarchy. It's got to be outside the age of decay, very similar to what Viktor Frankl notes in terms of his reflections from the concentration camp. It's always got to be above, and this is a natural weakness in a secularist perspective.
That's very relevant to our Phoebe's and my interests and the Feminine Chaos audience's interests. So Leigh, welcome. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about your book and your background?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. As Kat mentioned, my book is called Self-Care. It comes out June 30th, and it is a satire of the wellness industry and girl boss feminism. So for 3 years, I ran a feminist nonprofit organization called Out of the Binders, which was a joke on Mitt Romney's gaffe that he had binders full of us. So we were out of the binders, and I ran a conference called BinderCon for women writers. And I totally burned out on this feminist organizing experience. And that's what led me to start writing this novel. So I'm really interested in internet culture and internet drama and women using feminism as part of their brand. And so that's what led me to write this book. And the book is about two women who start a company called Ritual, Richual. That's kind of like if Goop and Instagram had a baby. It's like a social network. But drama ensues. And
that is so good. Ritual. That is so good.
And the two women at the helm of the company are forced to ask themselves, should we be good people or should we try to make some money?
It's so good, and it just anticipates this moment. It's so funny and timeless in that regard, but it also just this is playing out now. I mean, if Ritual were real, I would be completely reading it constantly because I would. But it's just all of these apology statements from the sort of the Devons and the Marins of the world are just they keep coming, and it's like
I don't know half the references in this video, but I'm sure some of you do.
It's there. It's funny rereading your novel now because it's it's happening. It's on.
I got really lucky with the timing, I think, with everything happening with the Wing and Man Repeller and
I didn't know any of these, so I had to look some of those up too.
Refinery 29, all these women-held media companies that have kind of used social justice as branding are being held to account now.
Yeah. So Leigh, are you actually a time traveler from the future? It's very important, to know. Did you go forward and then come back to write about everything that was going to happen, or do you just have your finger so thoroughly on the pulse of all of this stuff that you were able to see the writing on the wall before it all unfolded?
That's funny. The book is set in February 2017. So I set the book 1 month after Trump was inaugurated, and I picked a very defined time window because I thought, I don't know what's going to happen with this guy. I don't know what's going to happen to our country. So I'm just going to pick a few week time period. But even then, there was so much drama around the Women's March. And what I've been thinking a lot about lately is like when I was running this Facebook group, which had 40,000 members, I would like go into the trenches of this Facebook group every day, and then I would emerge, and then I would tell my partner what had happened on the internet that day. But what I'm finding today is that it's not happening in these tiny bubbles. It's actually happening in this like grander sphere of public discourse that everyone, including like my 71-year-old mom, like she's aware of these online controversies. So the bubble
reminds me of Benjamin Boyce. We're all living in evergreen now.
Has expanded. So I thought I was writing about kind of a subculture or a smaller internet community, but I think we're all living it now at large.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true. I mean, I think a lot of us who have been kind of interested in these topics, we were told for so long, like, oh, this is niche. This is only, for the people who are online. And then
it's pretty amazing that none of these women have gotten better microphones.
I think partly also, with the pandemic and, everyone being at home, everyone who can be online is that much more online. And there's like dividing things between online life and real life starts to seem,
the internet is more real at this point. Like at least, we can all see each other's faces instead of wearing masks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Is this more real life than when we go out in public wearing masks?
It might be at this point. You get home, you take your mask off and you log on, and then you also take your mask off. You stop being polite and start getting real.
Right.
Absolutely. Oh boy.
This is the least interesting part of the conversation.
Right.
So we wanted to talk about, basically like your entire book, which just, inject it directly into my veins. It's so good. And
there were some lines. Okay, you should, I'm sorry, but just the thing about, can I just say a very intense post by Maren Gelb, sponsored by Lunar Milk. That got me. That really got me. And then, sorry, I just need to explain this line. There were layers of offense to unearth here, and everyone was on an archaeological dig. Oh my God, that's the internet. That's what's happening.
That's really good. I'm going to have to buy this book.
That's so beautiful. Sorry.
I think I learned that from a Freddie Dubois piece about offense archaeology or something.
Oh yeah, Planet of Cops, which we mention on our podcast all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, but it does seem like dig.
I got to dig up that one too now. Hadn't heard of this either. Freddie Dubois, of course, is a blogger that's been around a while. He's a real Marxist, as opposed to the ones who only play them on TV for profit, or maybe he does play it for profit. I don't know. Conservatives have always been cops, obviously. I mean literal cops, the professionals who tend to have a reactionary bent, right. But the people flooding the FCC with complaints about Janet Jackson's nipple, they're cops. William Burroughs summarizing the whole social conservative movement perfectly as decent church-going women with their mean, pinched, bitter, evil faces. People who narc on their neighbors are cops. People who want to scour test scores to get teachers fired are cops. And people who want to keep an eye on trans people when they go to the bathrooms are cops, obviously. Drug test people on food stamps. Strip search Muslims at the airport. Let me see your papers, please. Conservatives were born cops. They've always been. They always will. Milo Yiannopoulos, he's a cop too. Yada, 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 yada. But who wanted a career as cops? Well, morning, noon, and night. The woke world is full of snitches, informants, rats. Go on any space concerned with social justice and you will find endless surveillance. Everyone is judged. Everyone is under surveillance. Everything you say can be scoured, picked over, analyzed for any possible offense. I read about the power button, PWRBTTN accusations. They're disturbing. I take them seriously, but these guys have had their careers erased overnight, and the idea that they have any responsibility to give them a chance to defend themselves is treated like you took part in their alleged crimes. You simply cannot say in polite society, basic fairness requires us to avoid a rush to judgment and to give people the right to respond to accusations. To do so gets you lumped in with the criminals. Like a friend of mine said, the only acceptable reaction to an accusation is enthusiastic and unqualified acceptance. Those of you following my sermons will note that Kenneth Bailey, New Testament scholar who lived through the Lebanese Civil War, basically wrote these things word for word in terms of his commentary on the Gospel of Luke. And I've been reading them to my church, and it's been really interesting seeing what people get upset about. Like a friend of mine once said, the only acceptable reaction to accusation is enthusiastic and unqualified acceptance. You don't know how people can simultaneously talk about prison abolition and restoring the idea of forgiveness to literal criminal justice system, and at the same time turn the entire social world into a kangaroo court system. Like I once wrote, we can't simultaneously be a movement based on rehabilitation and restorative justice and a vicious, judgmental, moral aristocracy. You don't know who thinks everyone's guilty until proven innocent. Cops. You know who thinks people don't deserve the right to defend themselves. Cops. And you don't know, and you know who defends basic fairness and due process are as bad as the criminals. Cops. And very interesting article. I'll have to put the link in here too. Again, 2017.
Digging through the layers, maybe you don't know why it's offensive at first, but if you keep looking, you'll find reasons.
Yes, you'll find something. Yeah, there's that opportunism aspect of it. So I want to return to talking about self-care, in a little bit, but also want to talk about your extremely viral Medium essay about the fall of the girl boss, which you somehow managed to basically predict, 3 years before it happened. And so there was, I'm just gonna grab a quote here. So you were talking about lean in feminism, which, Phoebe also wrote a piece about the death of recently. And this one sentence really kind of got to it for me. It was, Sandberg allowed women to feel like they were activists whenever they advocated for themselves. And I have been thinking a lot about this, and how it basically, for a very, very brief time,
activists allowed them to feel like activists. Well, that's meaning, right? I mean, meaning is this little gyroscope inside of us. It's how we're connected to the bigger world. Of course, that's what Vervaeke's talking about. And how I can, when I advocate for myself, I'm an activist. When I use a particular product, when I use Apple, I'm an activist. And so activism has sort of become this portal, this gateway to the religious world.
Time period, it leveraged this sense that the sense of anxiety and insecurity that a lot of young millennial women suffer from, into self-advocacy, where suddenly like you yourself were the good cause, and to lean in was to push against sexism. So you were doing something noble, by advocating for yourself. Why didn't that last? What changed?
Oh, did it change? This idea of like self-empowerment feminism, I think anger can be so activating. It can feel so good to be angry and to have an object to be angry at. And when I was...
And again, this gets into Vervaeke stuff. Well, what is meaning? Well, meaning is you're in the agent arena relationship. And so the bigger you can connect with out there and connect it with you, the more powerful this is going to be. And especially when it's going to align without, any actual cross-bearing. I mean, my cross-bearing is, I might have to cut my nails short so I can be really fast on Twitter or Instagram.
Writing the book, writing that book in 2017 on the heels of the Women's March, just the anger at Donald Trump being our president, but feeling powerless to do anything. So you look for other targets.
Now, what's really funny is when I listen to this and I think about a lot of my audience, you might look at Leigh Stein and think, oh, she's so IDW because she's so down with us now because she wrote this book and she's calling it out, yada, yada, yada. But wait till you hear the whole interview. I don't know if I'm going to have time because some people are stopping by to meet me, but let's keep going.
And so if whatever you can do, I don't know, it's self-empowerment, but it's also like you feel part of a community with other women who feel the same way you do. And I think that's a really powerful feeling too. So you feel like an activist when you're speaking up for women, and then you can also justify things to yourself like, well, I'm doing this because of inequality, so that gives me permission to do X thing.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting just in terms of the whole, like in terms of self-care in the very literal sense of like putting on a face cream and so forth, how it seems like there's been this real sort of reclaiming of all of that, of like having a skincare routine and stuff as not just okay by feminist standards, but like the ultimate feminist act is like doing something coded as feminine that's been denigrated by society and all of this. And I'm really struck by, sorry to keep returning to your novel, but how Devin, her internal monologue it's an Into the Glass top shelf. Like it's just, but I mean, a satire of it was just amazing. And it really, this notion that the more, like all of the, Kat and I were talking about this recently in terms of Sephora this was when there were still stores, having ads that sort of make you think you're doing something noble and sort of gender challenging by buying makeup. There just seems to be some way that it's not just that like anything you do for yourself is activism, but it's also anything you do that's gendered feminine sort of is somehow anything you used to feel like a bad feminist for doing is suddenly now good.
Right. So I think there's like a lot of guilt and shame because we were told by the beauty industry, we were told one thing, like when I was growing up reading whatever I was reading, 17 magazine or the messages I got about beauty and skincare and diet and losing weight. And that has all changed. But if we want to groom ourselves, I think the brands are aware that we also want to feel like we're activists at the same time. So like I'm getting Instagram ads for a lip gloss that donates 10% to like an LGBTQIA organization so that I can feel like I'm supporting gay people whenever I use this lip gloss. So it's getting very complicated.
Yeah.
But I think it is to assuage our guilt that and it's so complicated. Am I buying in? And am I buying into the patriarchy by putting on makeup to come on this podcast? I mean, I'm very confused. I'm very confused as a woman. And from that place of confusion, I wrote this book.
It's so funny. I'm sorry. So good. So good. Yeah.
Well, now it's interesting because you're talking about, we've segued from sort of, encouraging women to like literally look into the mirror. It's, and do your skincare routine. And it's an act of, of radical feminism and radical activism to spend 10 minutes literally staring at yourself, putting stuff on your face. But now
I swear, I can't make this video better. I can't make this video better.
Now the notion of self-improvement or self-care is kind of pivoted to like working on mostly at this point, your racism. So we're back to, look into the mirror, like spend all of this time interrogating yourself. But it's less about looking at what's on the surface and more about kind of like aiming your gaze right into your own navel and maybe never relieving it. Never getting it out.
Yeah, like to circle back to Lean In was a lot of that book is like, what are your own personality defects? Are you too much of a people pleaser? Have you been conditioned to do that by the patriarchy? How can you stop doing that? So it's like work on your personality. Then we get, like Glossier. So the beauty trend that it's no longer about wearing a lot of makeup. It's about having perfect skin and then lightly putting makeup on top of your perfect skin. So then we had to master that. And now I was working on this op-ed, but it didn't find a home. So I'll just tell the joke here. But I had a joke in this op-ed, it's like the life-changing magic of tidying up your whiteness. So it's
my God.
Another.
It needs a home. I wanted to have a home.
It's like.
I can't make a commentary on this video because it's just too there. How makeup is so, what are you doing? and then no makeup. Oh, but then the beautiful skin under the you use makeup because your skin is bad. Well, now we're gonna have to, now you have the demand of having perfect skin, and tidying up your whiteness is deadly humor.
Like another self-improvement trend. You worked on your home, you worked on your skincare, you worked on your personality. Now you need to work on your implicit bias because you're secretly much more racist than you ever dreamed you were.
For a Calvinist, it's the coming of the kingdom. I don't even have to preach; they're preaching to themselves.
Oh, I'm so glad you gals have put this together.
Yeah, you guys, gals.
Because I wrote about this years ago in terms of privilege awareness and all of that, but I never had thought about it in terms of fitting in with other types of self-improvement. But it totally, only in terms of college admissions where you're sort of promoting yourself in a very specific way. But what's also interesting about it is it's a way of sort of addressing this binary, either women as women are the most oppressed people in the world, or white privileged women in the West / in the States are the most privileged in the world and the true oppressors. This is a kind of way of, I don't know if it's bridging the gap or if it's just kind of switching things back to women as victims, but turning it the whole self-improvement, self-flagellation thing that's currently underway on all of these platforms is just I wonder, is anybody really going to is this a case where women are women CEOs are self-sabotaging in a way that male CEOs wouldn't, or is this just part of their branding and they'll be just fine? That's, I guess, some of this time will tell, but
it's really interesting when she talked about the college entrance stuff. Dallas Willard came up, was it in the Friday question and answer? And, this reminds me of the beginning of his best book, The Divine Conspiracy. Dallas Willard, of course, was a philosophy professor at University of Southern California. And he's writing in this book about, the suspicion now has come to force of unspoken dogma in the highest centers of Western learning. Of course, one has to assume in practice there is a right side up, just to get on with life. But it is equally assumed that right side up is not a subject of knowledge. And so, in a college admissions, you want to emphasize your SAT scores. But notice now, to get into the most elite colleges, you have to demonstrate, I started this club. I started this... I'm an activist. It's not that I can't just be a scholar. Being a scholar alone won't get me into the upper reaches of higher education. I need to be an activist and a scholar. And again, as someone who has lived most of his life in religious institutions and Calvinist institutions, this has long been the case. To get into Calvin College in the 80s, which everybody gets into Calvin College, it's just true, but needed a letter from my pastor, a letter of reference from my pastor to get it, because it's a religious institution. They didn't just want academics. There's an academic support program. In fact, they took people in as a calling. And so that in some ways was sort of divorced. That's all this religious stuff, but you watch it just coming up. Derek Bach, as president of Harvard University for many years, in his president's report of 1986 to 1987, he referred to some well-known moral failures in financial circles in the political life of the nation. He wondered out loud what universities might do to strengthen moral character of their graduates. Religious institutions, he continued, no longer seem as able as they once were to impart basic values to the young. In these circumstances, universities, including Harvard, needed to think hard about what they can do in the face of many perceived as widespread decline in ethical standards. But again, this is written by Dallas Willard. This came out, what year did this come out? Maybe 2000, something like that. 2005, perhaps. But now the ethical standards are, are you sufficiently anti-racist? Because you're going to have to show your anti-racist bona fides, but you're not going to get a letter from your pastor because there is no institution that's in charge of this. Bach points out that in other days, the instructor's aim was to foster a belief in common accepted moral values. Now all is changed. Again, he's writing in the 80s. Today's course in applied ethics does not seek to convey a set of moral truths, but tries to encourage the student to think carefully about complex moral issues. One sense that governing assumptions of the discussion is that these two objectives are mutually exclusive. The principal aim of the course, Bach continues, is not to impart right answers. Well, see, that was sort of a transitional phase. Now they're imparting right answers. And these women are sort of trying to figure out, well, what are the right answers? And that's the whole point of Leigh Stein here, in that religious organizations have been doing this and we sort of threw them out, and now we're trying to make this stuff up and thinking, well, what do we have to do? And so, John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson, they're right there in the university. The principal aim of this course is not to impart right answers, but to make students more perceptive in detecting ethical problems when they arise, better acquainted with the best moral thought that has accumulated through the ages, and more equipped to reason about ethical issues that they face. Now, the church, well, we wouldn't want to talk to them, because, again, if you read George Marston's book about basically a survey of how the Harvard and all these other institutions founded by none other than the likes of the cohort around Jonathan Edwards, what happened? Where'd they all go? Finally, coming to the conclusion of his report, President Bach remarks, despite the importance of moral development to the individual student and society, one cannot say that higher education has demonstrated a deep concern for the problem. Well, that has sure changed. Especially in larger universities, the subject is not treated as serious responsibility worthy of sustained discussion and determined action by the faculty and administration. Well, that has sure changed. And he goes on a little bit later. But if indeed there's now no body of moral knowledge of our culture, then a number of things highly positioned people express surprise about are not surprising at all. Robert Coles, professor of psychiatry and medical humanities at Harvard and a well-known researcher and commenter on matters social and moral, published a piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education on the disparity between the intellect and the character. Let's see if this will... point of view, 1995. All right. Oh, crud. This happens with Kindle books. Such a pain in the neck. Can I get there? Now I got to pause. The piece is about the task of connecting the intellect to character. This task, he added, is daunting. Really? His essay was occasioned by an encounter with one of his students over moral insensitivity. Is it hard for him to say immoral behavior? Not anymore. And what's interesting again is you can just watch over the decades this transition. And if you look over a wider period, well, everyone in the 1880s sort of assumed they knew what was right and wrong. The church told them, the Bible told them, and over time, well, you got to push those things away. And now, well, we're going to have to make this up. And, well, his essay was occasioned by an encounter of one of his students over moral insensitivity. It is hard for him to say immoral behavior of other students, some of the best and brightest at Harvard. This student was a young woman of a Midwestern working class background, where, as is well known, things like right answers and ideology remain strong. Notice what happened to ideology. She cleaned students' room to help pay her way through the university. Again and again, she reported to Coles, people who were in her classes with her treated her ungraciously because of her lower economic position, without simple courtesy and respect, and often were rude and sometimes crude to her. She was repeatedly propositioned for sex by one student in particular as she went about her work. He was a man with whom she had 2 moral reasoning courses, in which he excelled and received the highest of grades. The pattern of treatment led her to quit her job and leave the school, and to something like an exit interview with Coles. After going over not only the behavior of her fellow students, but also the long list of highly educated people who had perpetrated the atrocities for which the 20th century is famous, she concluded by saying to him, "I've been taking all these philosophy courses, and we talk about what's true and what's important, what's good. Well, how do you treat people to be good?" And she added, "What's the point of knowing good if you don't try to keep becoming a good person?" Professor Coles proceeds to comment on how ineffectual his efforts to respond to this young woman were. He seemed genuinely conscience-stricken that he shrugged in response to her disappointment. But he never confronts the fact that he certainly did not tell the students in his course that they should not treat someone doing menial work with disdain, or that they should not proposition a classmate or anyone else who is cleaning their rooms. Well, we've certainly remedied that, but will it actually mean anything? Because all of these just moral indictments and moral have to sit on something quite a bit deeper and firmer and larger. And if you take all of that out, then suddenly people go looking to try and, well, we have to figure all of this stuff out for ourselves.
I mean, that's a good question, right? Is it fair for us to hold women to a different standard than what we hold men to? Is it fair that we have to say women have to be perfect, impeccable feminists while they succeed, and men are just men?
Right.
And what's so interesting is that fairness is always sort of this on the spot little, it's something you can pull out of your pocket and say, well, is this fair? And because of the complexities of the situation, a lot of what's happened is that we're going to throw that out. And we're going to say, instead of before, the enemy was the double standard. Now, well, we're just going to enforce a new double standard in order to remedy old double standards. And we're going to call that fair. But everybody has that little fairness calculator in their pocket and say, hey, wait a minute. And what you actually wind up building up is resentment. And in all of this anti-patriarchy, anti-racism stuff, if your remedies build resentment in any of your groups, you are likely going to fuel misogyny and racism, because most of that, or a lot of that, is simply built on in individual people, not carried on intergenerationally, but in individual people, resentment. In other words, in order to try to address the ancient crops of misogyny and racism, you just see new ones. And that's what I see happening.
Right. I mean, and there's like this is an interesting segue, because this additional burden, right, that women are, I think kind of undeniably subjected to, was this expectation that you are going to work against your own interests if it's in service of like the cause that we've decided is the most important thing. And
now this is in some ways just simply lay down your, take up your cross and follow me. If you don't take up your cross, you're not worthy of me. This again is just simply a retreading in more ambiguous, generic language from what you have in Christianity.
And I feel like we've seen this a lot lately on a small scale, where you have individual writers who are getting like chastised for accepting assignments, doing certain work because they're taking up space that should have gone to someone else. And like
the New Yorker swimsuit with headscarf.
The swimsuit with headscarf.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Right.
Yeah.
There was the Rihanna Vogue interview, which these are things that we discussed in previous episodes. But also even more recently, like Maris Kreisman wrote a good piece for the LA Times about how you could improve diversity in publishing by paying your entry-level employees a living wage, which, another thing that we've discussed here, like, yes, Feminine Chaos endorses this as, not the only, but maybe one tine of a possible solution. Maris Kreisman wrote this piece for the LA Times and immediately got like excoriated for writing it when she should have apparently passed the assignment along to a more deserving writer, a writer of color. Mm-hmm. I think
there will always be a more deserving person. Again, I listen to this stuff and I think it's like you sort of took the Bible and took all of the people out of it and turned it into principles. And then you just go back to George Marsden's book and realize, oh, that's sort of what they did in modernism in the end of the 19th century with the Bibles. We're going to turn this all into principles. Okay.
I think that the thing about this, and it kind of drives me crazy to see it because, I mean, most of the women who are doing this, they're just freelancers. You know, it's not like they have institutional support. They all already suffer from crazy imposter syndrome anyway. So, you know, it's incredibly effective to take this approach. You know, say you're taking up space, like get out of here. And so instead of lean in, it's bench yourself.
Oh, absolutely. The taking up space thing is so.
Instead of lean in, it's bench. Do you want to be anti-racist? Bench yourself. Don't talk. Don't contribute. It's amazing to me.
So fascinating because, and I guess this does get at the whole sort of girl boss lean in backlash thing again, because it really, like, the whole thing had been, you're entitled to take up space as a woman. Don't apologize. You know, that is feminism. That's noble and beautiful and all of that. And now it's like, but don't take up space if you are a woman who's privileged in whichever way. I recently, on a forum I take part in, but only as a lurker on Facebook, a different forum, but saw a whole sort of meltdown thing that could totally have been satire, but sort of tragically wasn't. And the woman being piled on was a non-Black person of color, and it just, but she was privileged within a very specific context, like very highly specific context. And it's like, she's the privileged party, and therefore, you know, that's that, you know, and it sparked another post as a whole thing. Yeah, it's just basically any woman who can be considered privileged in any sort of specific context is suddenly the oppressor and shouldn't be taking up space. And then I guess it's very confusing what's supposed to be done, I guess, like what's actually helpful and what's just kind of ceding the ground to the same men who were in power already.
Right. And I think, like, my book is set on the internet now, which is where we all live now. But I think the internet has a way of really flattening our identities and also encouraging us to create these personal brands based on our identities.
My goodness. I'm obsessed with a line from your book about, okay, this is in a forum. Okay. What if every ritual user put their identity markers in their profile so we all wouldn't have to make assumptions from their pick, like Black, capitalized, avant la lettre, okay, white, not capitalized, Jewish, Palestinian, cis, trans, NB, straight, bi, queer, vegan, gluten-free, Pisces, INFJ, I don't know this one, etc. What is
You didn't know the Myers-Briggs.
INFJ?
You don't know. I'm an INFJ.
It's the Myers-Briggs thing.
Oh, okay.
I'm a dreaded TJ, by the way.
Okay.
Just as an aside, there is a whole sphere of Twitter where people do put that in their bios. It's and it demarks so much in the way that. And
of course, Carl Jung's behind the Myers-Briggs.
Pronouns in the bio, not so much anymore, but used to demarcate a certain type of online entity. The presence of your Myers-Briggs personality type also denotes a certain type of online entity. And because I don't want all of the ETFJs coming after me and burning my house down, I'm not going to say anything.
No, the Fs are nice because the Fs, I'm an F, it's about feelings. You want to make the other person feel okay when you're giving feedback.
Oh, right. It's the Ts.
It's the Ts you should be afraid of.
It's the TJs.
The TJs.
the TJs.
That's right.
I will Google this later. I've heard of Myers-Briggs, but I've never heard of putting this in a bio. Wow. Another thing, just about the whole...
I had seen it on Twitter. I thought, why are they putting their Myers-Briggs things on Twitter? I had no idea.
Online world, though, and the women, all of this, and I say this for obvious personal reasons, obvious to Kat and to perhaps our listeners. So childcare basically disappeared during this pandemic with no particular end in sight. School is kind of a questionable thing.
Panic. We have to deal with our own progeny.
And there's just something kind of weird, and I don't know if this is a very vague thought I have at the moment, but there's something kind of weird about the true death of empowerment, feminism, coinciding with a time when, just for logistical reasons, mothers of young or even not so young children are basically being kicked out of the workforce.
Yes.
In droves.
Oh, it's that darn biology again.
And I don't know. I don't know where that thought goes, but it's just something that I've seen both written about a lot and been, living.
And it's quite interesting because I live in a fairly male world in some ways. Church is fairly feminine. And most of the people I deal with in church are women. Many of those women, in fact, probably most of those women, are African American women. But in my male world, I have an older male world. My wife's world tends to be, my wife teaches in a school that is very popular among young, well-educated, this is a very popular school. And so she deals in that world. So when I listen to these women talk, it's like I hear a lot of the stuff my wife tells me about, and it's fascinating.
And yeah, it seems like there are pluses and minuses, I think, to the end of that sort of feminism. Like, obviously, Sheryl Sandberg, I do not identify on a personal level at all with Sheryl Sandberg. I wish I had that sort of drive or
reach. What's interesting about this is, and now pay attention to, when we make stuff up as we go along, I think about this in sort of a Petersonian, Darwinian frame. If, in fact, what we inherit from our religious traditions, from our script, the biblical text, from the religious text, are, in fact, years of accumulated wisdom that have been through pandemics, it's all time-tested. It's sort of the difference between an ideology made up by someone quickly and that which has survived the ages. And so then you listen to this stuff with that frame in mind, you begin to realize, we're learning what other people have known. Well, why didn't we? Again, the sign of a healthy culture is it affords wisdom to those who have not had enough experiential or biological time to gain that wisdom themselves. And this is what makes human beings so powerful, because we can, in fact, accumulate wisdom and encode it and pass it down and represent it in institutions and all of that. It's, of course, the same thing that you look at and say, well, racism has gotten into there. Misogyny has gotten into there. All kinds of other evils have gotten into there. Well, maybe. You have to figure that out. But that's the power of human beings. And sort of when we cut ourselves off from the past, then we have no wisdom,
ability to think about money. But yeah, I guess what I'm asking is what's lost, maybe, if anything, or is it just good riddance to girl boss feminism? Does it have anything in its favor? Like, will it be sad if it's gone?
I want to say something about you. I think it's so valid that you bring up this issue of childcare, because I think that was one of the original critiques of Lean In, is that it's fine and well to lean into your ambition and like, go girl, but like, who's watching your kids? Like Sheryl Sandberg has very good
because we sure don't want to watch them. Those crazy homeschoolers.
Childcare. And so I think we are,
in a pandemic, all pastors are televangelists and all moms are homeschoolers. There we are.
Having your ambition and like, go girl, but like, who's watching your kids? Like Sheryl Sandberg has very good childcare. And so I think we are having a moment now where we're like, how long can this go on for people who do have children? And I think it's so easy to get into this offense archaeology on social media and avoid the bigger problems, because the bigger problems are so impossible to solve. How do we get Mitch McConnell out of running the country? I don't have a good idea, but like, he's a much bigger.
And I know she just triggered a whole bunch of you. These are the bigger problems. They're the political problems. because that's the largest frame you have. The political problems are the largest frame you have. And if that's the largest frame you have, your frame isn't big enough. Politics is now, religion is always.
Bigger problem than like a bad word in a tweet.
And of course, this was June of 2020, I believe. So that was right in sort of the heat of the election.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not be too hard on her because, again, one of my little mantras, everybody gets to have a political opinion. Everybody gets to have a religious opinion. Everybody gets to have an opinion, okay? She's got one. She got to share it. Good. Don't beat her up. Don't, keep yourself together. Don't be one giant button of reactivity. If you wear your buttons, people are going to push them.
So, I mean, that's a good point. The difference between, what seems intractable. And I wrote about this sort of self-help brand of like feminist social justice, for Tablet, which is, the piece is not out, unfortunately, but
I was going to be like, I can't wait to, okay.
It's going to be on, Tuesday, it's the 26th. This is
Tuesday will be the 30th.
The 30th. Oh, also
my book will come out and Kat's piece will come out.
Right. Obviously one of these things is more important.
Looks like Real Clear Politics picked up her piece. I'm a digger, I gotta dig. Why social justice feels like self-help privilege for women. Oh, come on, where's the link? Why can't I get to the link? This book inspired me to continue on the journey of personal growth that I've been on and gave me fresh new perspectives to consider. It is a resource and a guide, like having a learned teacher with you in the intimacy of your own home as you confront some of the most troubling and critical truths about yourself. It wants you to meet your full potential, but you have to do the work. Obviously not very Calvinist. The journey is hard, but I assure you, it is worth it. Half of these lines come from 5-star reviews of contemporary self-help books. Titles like Girl Wash Your Face by Rachel Hollis and an early aughts law of attraction phenom, The Secret. The other half comes from reviews of anti-racist handbooks, all of which rocketed to the top of the bestseller list this month amid the nationwide movement sparked by the May 26 murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police. Titles include Leah Saad's Me and White Supremacy and, of course, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. The similarities are eerie but unsurprising. Rachel Hollis's Guide to Self-Help Through Face Hygiene and Robin DiAngelo's Manual for the White and Fragile provoke the same sort of star-eyed praise using the same highly specific vocabulary. The word journey turns up with remarkable frequency. It's been in the church for a long time. Because of the fundamental similarities in what they're selling, and more importantly, because the same people are lining up to buy them. Self-help has always been a woman's game. Not that men don't. Well, we've got Jordan Peterson on our side. Not that men don't also need to improve themselves. Hey, who you saying needs to improve themselves? Improve thyself, doctor. But the books targeted to them tend to assume an existing state of self-confidence. You're great as you are. You could just be a little better. Or maybe actually they're higher in negativity, big 5 personality, neuroticism. Men learn optimization, life hacks, the power of thinking without thinking, 4-hour work weeks, and other highly effective habits that are meant to help them build upon their innate perfection, like a software upgrade. Women, on the other hand, have faulty wiring that needs ripping out. Our most beloved self-help books are all about fixing something that came broken, delving into the psyche, and excavating everything what's wrong with you. Women are exhorted to work on themselves the way weekend warriors might work on a vintage Trans Am, tinkering endlessly, replacing parts, fixing one flaw only to find that the engine still won't turn over. The real problem's still buried somewhere under the hood. That you might actually get behind the wheel and drive out of the garage someday is a possibility so distant that it's hardly worth thinking about. Of course, only the most elite women can afford the luxury of so much wallowing in their imperfections, a fact that feminist writers have readily critiqued in other contexts. A New York Times article by Jessica Knoll noted accurately that the trillion-dollar wellness business is a largely white, privileged enterprise catering to largely white, privileged, already thin and able-bodied women, promoting exercise only they have the time to do, and Tuscan kale only they have the resources to buy. But if that's true wellness in our late capitalist movement, it's equally true of wokeness. Diversity, an $8 billion enterprise back in 2003, exploded in the wake of Donald Trump's election into one of the nation's fastest growing industries. And that's, it's sort of like gun sales boomed when Barack Obama took office. Donald Trump, was the best thing that ever happened to the diversity industry. Colleges funneled millions of dollars into diversity and exclusion efforts in 2019. A survey found 63% working diversity trainers have been hired in the last 3 years. And it's not just a corporate strategy that's up for sale. You can buy diversity in the form of books, movies, merchandise, and $2,500 dinner parties where white women pay to confess their racial complicity. Robin DiAngelo's white fragility seminars, at which attendees are overwhelmingly white, female, and highly educated, cost as much as $165 per person. Her keynote speaking fee is $40,000. Smoking dogs, man. Whatever is being sold, it'll be a jade. Whatever's being sold, be it a jade vagina egg or a ticket to an anti-racist workshop, there's a great deal of money to be made off guilt, anxiety, and insecurity of financially secure white women who are probably high in trait neuroticism. But for those whose activism begins and ends with hashtags and book clubs, the narcissism is undeniable and arguably even part of the appeal. What Vulture's Lauren Michelle Jackson calls vanity project, where the goal is no longer to learn about race, power, and capitalism, but to spring closer to the enlightened order of anti-racist, and yet where to read many of these books, Jackson notes, one might reach the conclusion that there is no anti-racist status within reach of a lifetime. And that's exactly the point that many of these people have made. Self-help social justice doesn't just offer privileged white women the comfort of a permanent passion project. It fuels the pleasant, ego-driven delusion that nothing is more important to any cause, than the innermost minutia of our own thoughts, attitudes, and feelings. Well, it's an interesting day for diggers.
which is Leigh's book.
And also, I think that the recycling may have to go out here.
Oh,
I don't care. I don't know.
Are you obliquely threatening to put Leigh's book?
No,
I don't know.
Not.
That seemed like a microaggression.
Oh no, it was a self-deprecating remark about that I have nothing going on the 30th.
Oh.
Particularly.
Maybe you should reread Self-Care. Or any one of these other tomes that are being recommended to us. And
I will, I think, memorize White Fragility so as to recite it.
But one of the things that I kind of, wanted to sort of think my way around in this piece is the idea that, this self-help brand of social justice is so inherently disempowering. I mean, we have, the women who kind of buy into this is very highly educated, elite, privileged, mostly white, but more importantly, just, very successful women, who are like, if they organize, they're one of the most powerful voting blocs out there. I mean, there's a reason why everyone wants to speak to, I guess back in 2008 or whatever, it was soccer moms, but it's always that same group.
And this brings in some really interesting places, because a lot of their money comes from men. Not all of it by any means, but the thing about mobilizing women is you usually get their husbands too. And churches have known this for a very long time. Attract the children, then the moms come, and the moms look around and say, oh, there's some things that need to be done here. Honey, get at it. And at the same time, we see sort of the undermining of what I call the generational handshake, where, well, what about divorce? What about not marriage? And a little bit later, what about children? I mean, children are going to come up a number of times in this, and what do we do with children? As if none of us in this conversation have ever been one.
who's sort of sought after, because they do actually hold enormous power if they leave their homes and coalesce and do activism like as a block.
Well, I don't remember if you guys talked about the Jen Mag piece about Karens, but she makes this point. I can't remember the writer's name, but she talks about how we flipped the House in 2018 because of suburban white women voters.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And these books are like,
Karens save the nation.
No, you don't get to do activism. You have to work on yourself. Go inside, sit on your hands, unpack your shit, like work on yourself forever, probably forever.
Oh, I literally saw a tweet that was somebody saying that anti-racism shouldn't be something accessible to somebody who's a soccer mom, like literally said soccer mom trying to do it in her spare time. And it's
you should do it full time.
Well, it just seemed like it needs to be more difficult than that. It's no joke. It's no laughing matter. And it's like, so basically, if you aren't a 19-year-old college student, you can't be anti-racist, because if you have other obligations, well, then you're just racist for having them.
And what's so insane is that, for most of us who aren't 19-year-old college students, if only. Those were such good skin days. But you do have a job and a family.
College was good skin days.
And adult obligations. And, political engagement is inherently something that is probably not your full-time job. But that makes it all the more important to, do it in the spare minutes, even if it's like.
And again, you have there's the institutional shift away from religious institutions now, because it's homeless, and so it migrates over into political institutions, and it all becomes politics.
And I mean, this is the thing that drives me crazy about this kind of breed of act. It's like slacktivism, basically. It's, it keeps you passively turning pages and thinking about yourself instead of doing anything that could change the world.
Is it like a neoliberal thing of that's actually the whole point of this, and that the whole point of it is to kind of maintain the status quo? And I mean, that had been my thinking in terms of privilege awareness, that the whole point of privilege awareness is that it refocuses energies on, not always intentionally, but on awareness rather than on doing anything about it. So the end goal of privilege awareness is being aware of your privilege and being polite about it and having the right etiquette. But if anything, that may just reinforce whichever hierarchies, and there's no implication that you're actually even interested in changing things. You may want to maintain your privilege, but you just are being nicer about it or something. So I almost wonder if that's the same dynamic with the activism as self-improvement, that if you're home reading, 40 books about, the reading list that keeps growing about how to be woke today.
There's an interesting similarity to late antiquity, where a part of the reason they looked for a monotheism was because it was just too much darn work keeping all the gods happy. And so you have one God that you can work with, instead of, as Augustine sort of taunts in The City of God, the God of the doorknob and the God of the door hinges and the God of the door frame and the God of the door wood. And you just have all of these different things you have to do. So if you have one system that has good and bad, you bring it all into one thing. You put the goal above the hierarchy, and you can actually have a working system. But in this way, you can't actually accomplish anything in life, because you're just always doing the inner work.
Yeah, you're probably not doing anything else. And I wonder whether there are sort of forces at work encouraging that for that reason, if that makes sense.
This is indicative of the bubble that I live in, but I wouldn't say that the women I know reading White Fragility are not already activists, because I do know a lot of activists from my own organizing work with BinderCon. But and
again, activist is now basically the new monk.
I am noticing in my bubble is that the women I know reading White Fragility are women with master's degrees. They have very far left politics. They are explicitly anti-racist. These would be, the women that I would count as the most openly intersectional, feminist, anti-racist activists. And they're the ones reading White Fragility. So I'm not seeing this book changing hearts and minds. I'm seeing white women who already feel bad that they're white reading this book. And an interesting critique that I've heard of White Fragility is that it's a distraction from the conversation about class, that we aren't really talking about class and capitalism when we're talking about
old Marxism versus new Marxism,
and the surge of anti-racism. It's a way for these, capitalism to continue and have us all fight about microaggressions, while Nike still makes $1 bajillion million.
Darn Nike.
That makes sense, and kind of goes back to even like the dawn of this approach. Like I'm thinking of the Peggy McIntosh privilege checklist, where so many of the things that she mentions as being her privileges as a white person are her privileges as a privileged white person, and how so much of what people discuss as white privilege is the privilege of white and wealthy people, or, white and well-educated people. And these things all matter, but yeah, to just try to find only one thing that's the thing that really matters, obviously ends up erasing quite a bit that's going on.
Right. McIntosh herself was like a 1%er, right? She came from an extremely wealthy family.
I think I learned that in Quillette, but
yeah.
What I had known is that she had taught at a very posh private school in Manhattan, which seemed just like a fascinating origin point for all of this.
Yeah, I think that she also came from family wealth. It's phenomenal to imagine somebody writing that essay and never pausing to think about class. The invisible knapsack essay.
I mean, I guess I wonder how much is intentional. I wonder how much is
unpacking that invisible Dior knapsack.
Well, this is something that actually has come up in Canada, where I am. I'm not Canadian, but I do live in Canada. With an
I wonder if she's legal.
A friend of mine has tweeted about this and frequently reminds everybody about it because it's amazing. Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, very good looking, son of another prime minister, has apologized for his, I guess, like his white privilege, his white male privilege, I don't know, which I'm sure he has. He also has son of a prime minister privilege, which you would think would be maybe the more salient thing in his own case. And I almost wonder if in cases like this is somebody, when certain people mention their white privilege, it's a way of sort of distracting from the privilege that they have an even more obvious
their economic privilege.
Economic and cultural. Yeah. I mean, like his connections as the son of a prime minister would be different from those of like a random white Canadian who would have certain privileges in society in terms of certainly interactions with law enforcement, among other issues, but would not have his connections and so forth.
I think that's a good point. I have no argument with this.
Well, I can make a connection to my novel because, there's three main characters of my novel, Marin and Devin, who are the white co-founders, and Khadijah, who's like their star number one employee. Khadijah is a black woman. She is frequently put in charge of things like listicles for Black History Month, pose for this photograph so that everyone knows we have a diverse company. But I think all three of my characters all harbor resentments and all think that the other ones have it better than them. And I think this kind of jockeying is reinforced and encouraged by the internet, where you're constantly comparing yourself to other people and trying to calculate how much.
The internet doesn't make us compare ourselves to other people. It just facilitates it.
Advantage or how much disadvantage do other people have? And react accordingly. And it's not a healthy way to engage with other people, in my opinion.
No, and it's something the internet really, because of its way of flattening, who everybody is, encourages it both where you don't know who people are online and the whole, all you have are just a few details. And it's much like, I just can't imagine in real life, in offline life, interacting with somebody via each identity marker, in that way. Mm. But online, it's almost like you're a bad person if you don't do that. Like, do you not, wait, there was some story about this recently and now I'm forgetting what it was.
Again, the good person, bad person thing is like that. Okay. Consciousness is monofocal and that creates binaries because we have to switch it. So good and bad person, it's like the bottom line for this in terms of, I'm not saying he's a bad person.
But where you're a bad, was it some advice column or something where it was like you're a bad person?
Oh, was this the Slate one where the woman wrote in saying, my kids have a diverse group of friends.
Right.
They say that they don't care about race. And I think
dreaded colorblindness, but not the physical kind.
This letter was probably trolling because she was like, as I understand it, not caring about race is as bad as being actively racist, or almost. And the advice columnist was like, well, you're trolling me, but actually it is, go do some reading.
Not caring about race is as bad as being the worst racist.
But yeah.
Oh, the whole go do some reading thing. There is, I'm still obsessed with some article we talked about on the podcast a while back about the anti-racist reading list, and just the notion that at this particular time, people have the time to even read quite that much is its own question.
Or the focus.
And who reads books? That's the thing. I mean, I got into YouTube partly because I looked around my congregation and said, you know what? Nobody reads. So who is reading? Well, it's just a little segment of the population is reading a lot of books.
I'm worried about I'm worried about everyone getting so self-conscious that we just go back to living in a segregated society. And I know some places still are segregated. I understand that, but
gotta say that. Gotta cover my what.
Where I would be so afraid of screwing up that I wouldn't have black friends, and that I would just only hang out with other white people because I have to be of my kind. Yesterday I just listened to the Blocked and Reported podcast episode.
I was just about to mention this.
Who went through a year of white fragility anti-racism training, and she talked about how part of the training was separating into what was called white affinity groups. So the people of color had their group, and then the white affinity group could work on their racism with other white people without putting the burden on people of color, which I understand conceptually, but I don't.
It's just like, let's get a bunch of white people together in a room and encourage them to strongly identify as white while we treat them like a persecuted minority. What could possibly go wrong?
Isn't it Connor Friedersdorf who's, I think, written about that's the sort of it's like the horseshoe theory thing, like white. Is it good for white people to
reinforce their white identity?
Well, I guess is it good, but I would even push further and say is it good, but also does it naturally follow that if you put a bunch of white people together and have them think about whiteness, that they will then naturally want to shed the advantages of whiteness, or will they become that much more attached to them? And I think that comes up with all forms of privilege, that, making people even more aware of the significance of all of their advantages that they didn't earn. It doesn't naturally follow that somebody wouldn't want their unearned.
And this earning that we do, where does that come from? I mean, our drive, our motivation, genetics. I mean, it's just insane.
Earned advantages, and especially once you start talking about people who are not, again, 19-year-old. Sorry to beat up on 19-year-old college students. It's just, it is.
They won't be 19 years old more than a year anyway. So
skin jealousy. It's the skin jealousy here as well. But yeah, it's just life is difficult, and everybody has idiosyncratic setbacks in their life, and I think people do kind of cling to, when they're not, thinking in the abstract, people do cling to their unearned advantages. And I just don't think
people cling to any advantage. Remember, we see opportunities and threats. That's what we see. We see that before we react to it. Our brains react to it before we even see the physical elements of it. That's how we work. We know this. Of course, people are going to cling to any advantage they have. And in fact, sloughing off advantages are usually trade-offs for other advantages. And so then you have something like Christianity, where in a sense you're trading down all of the physical, sociological advantages in order to trade up to spiritual advantages. And of course, once you have a generation of people saying, those spiritual advantages, they're just fictitious, well, guess what people are going to cling to? You slough off all of the potential upside for what they can get, and at least you don't have heaven to look forward to. So why am I going to get rid of these? And pretty much the economy in which this works is pride. We will consider you a better person if you, go sit on a pole? That's been tried. If you sell all you have and give to the poor, where did I get that quote from? Why did it just roll off my tongue like nothing? You would imagine I would have been schooled in the Bible since the time I was before I can remember.
Notion that becoming aware that you've had an easier time of it in one way, I don't think it's implied in that you would feel so bad about it that you would do anything more than performatively, I guess, reject it.
Yeah. Well, I think
it's so interesting because if you look at, on one hand, Jordan Peterson says, and I think he's right, your actions express your true beliefs. But now we have the entrance of the performative, where, what's the performative? We're performing these for the eyes of men. Oh my goodness, we're back into Matthew 6. We don't get away from any of this stuff.
I think that insofar as this stuff has been studied at all, what they found was that kind of hammering on white privilege, it didn't lead people to improve their attitudes towards people of color, but it did make them much, much, much less sympathetic towards white people who live in poverty. That was like the most measurable impact.
Anti-racism makes you a classist.
Of that approach.
That makes sense intuitively and also fits with the whole way that white privilege gets used to refer to privileges not shared by all white people, but rather shared by the wealthiest.
Yeah. Right. Leigh, you were talking about the Blocked and Reported interview with this woman who went through the race training. I
gotta find that. All right. So it's a podcast that I have to listen to now. So, it's going to be interesting.
A little bit derailed, but you were talking about that because it did have an impact on her, right?
Oh, I think I just brought it up because I was just thinking of that white affinity. I was just thinking of this idea of segregation, of whether we should all be separate.
Right. I mean, it made her incredibly anxious about her friendships with, her Black coworkers, and she found herself shying away from interactions with them.
Yeah.
Because, it was exhausting and terrifying having to interrogate herself after every single one to be like, wait, but was I racist?
And so we begin to see this pattern that the new anti-racism measures are actually increasing in society the things they are trying to go against.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead, Phoebe.
Oh no, I was just going to say that this seems to be, like, in the writing world in general, something that many writers of color and journalists of color will object to, and rightly so, that they will then be sort of brought on solely to sort of explain diversity. And even if they're paid for their work, even if it isn't some sort of unpaid labor of, educating people, just because you have experience of being Black doesn't mean that's the only thing you would know about. It doesn't make any sense. And then, writers get pigeonholed and are only allowed to write, novels where diversity is specifically, or oppression specifically, at the center of it. So I think it's not just that this approach forces white people to walk on eggshells, but it also just kind of, it also leaves a space so that almost that white people are the only ones who can write about whatever.
Yeah. This is so important and segues into what I wanted to talk about, which is like one of the critiques of my Girl Boss piece has been like, easy to critique this, but like, what's the solution? Like, where do we go from here? And,
because we have to figure it out right now, because we're smart enough to do this, and we've basically erased all of history. We don't want to look at we only use history to dig up resentment and outrage, but we're not going to learn anything from it because that was all bad. But we today are going to, and you think about, Jordan Peterson's new first rule in his new book.
If I'm going to critique, white fragility, self-improvement work, what's my answer? And I can just speak from my experience as a feminist organizer. When I had my conference BinderCon, we were very strategic in how we did our panels and workshops, and we wanted to have diversity, But we also didn't want to just have the Black writers talk on a panel about being Black writers. So we did panels about sports writing and reproductive justice and writing as a mom, balancing work-life balance, that were diverse, where we didn't expect women to only talk about their identity. And the other example I wanted to give is that there's this nonprofit called VITA that was counting bylines by gender in major publications. And in 2014, when I started my conference, Harper's Magazine was one of the worst in terms of gendered bylines. So they were publishing way more men than women. And so we thought, why is that? Is it because...
Doesn't matter what's in the magazine. We're just looking at, were you judging by their names?
Because they aren't getting enough pitches by women, or who knows? It's very hard to know why. But we put together an event at the conference called Speed Pitch, where writers could sign up to pitch editors. And I went to Harper's Magazine and I said, these are your numbers. Will you send a female editor to our conference? Because it was a women-only conference. They didn't have any female editors they could send.
Oh, no.
So I said, who else can you send? And so they sent one of their top male editors to our conference. And I thought that was great. So he was the only man that came to our conference, but he was there to take pitches from women. So looking for things that I can do myself, not just how I can reflect on my whiteness, but thinking of things I can actually do in the professional space where I work, is how I don't self-flagellate all day long.
That's such a brilliant tactic too. And so what was the outcome of your bringing that guy in? Did a lot of people place pieces with him?
I don't know if anyone placed a piece with him, but But we had a range of different editors, but he was, and good on Harper's for sending him. I think that was.
Now there's three kinds of racism, at least: motivational racism, propositional racism, outcome racism. Let's say there's three kinds of bias or bigotry with respect to sex. Let's say motivational, motivational would be, I hate women. I can't stand them. I don't want to be around them. Proposition would be women are dumber than men. And then outcomes in that, there's Harper's has fewer pieces. And so we're going to do something to address this. And they never bothered to measure if their actions actually addressed. It's based on, again, outcome sexism. It's based on outcome sexism, but it's performative. Wow, this is a great idea. He was here. We feel really good about this effort. Did it ever result in addressing the thing you were trying to address, the outcome? Did you ever? No, but we look less sexist because of it. We look more moral. And again, if you look at Matthew 6, it's about the religious show. And these issues are just deeply within, it's within Christianity. Jesus deals with these issues again and again and again. Don't do this for the religious show. Do not perform your righteousness to be applauded by the marketplace or by the people that you want to get applause from. Turn your heads away from the clapping gods. But, and again, for Leigh, I don't know, Leigh Stein, she addresses this in the New York Times piece, which is I thought excellent, because okay, so you had a guy there. Thanks for coming. Glad you heard pitches, but nothing really changed. So what do we think about that?
It was a way for them to show that they were paying attention too.
So on the subject of binders, it did ultimately end up melting down a little bit. Yeah. There was, surrounding BinderCon, I don't want to get too deeply into this.
We can get into it.
But there
yes.
was, and we mentioned this in your Jen piece, that there was a certain amount of drama, that resulted in you eventually deciding to step away, that it just got exhausting. And we've talked about this before on another podcast episode about how women's spaces seem especially prone to unraveling in this particular way. Why do you think that is?
It's poignant to me. I recently became a member of the freelance community study hall, where you have to pay to be a member. And so they pay moderators to moderate it. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we tried to do with binders, and we could never figure out a way to monetize it. But we always thought it would be it would be a healthier space if you had some financial stake in it, if you had to pay $5 a month for these resources so that we could compensate the moderators, because I was one of the moderators. It's exhausting work. It's every holiday weekend, everyone would be on Facebook and there would be a new conflict for me to be tagged into to moderate. So why is it women? I don't know, but I can say like the one of the final straws was a big conflict about whether we should have babies and children at the conference or not. Women were very divided on this, and I am a Libra. I'm an INFJ and a Libra.
So you get rid of religion and astrology comes right back.
But I really listened and I really tried to find a compromise. I listened to both sides. I listened to arguments for babies. I listened to arguments against babies. The women on my staff who had children didn't want the babies. So it wasn't just if you have a baby, you believe this or not. It was really complicated, and I think this is one of these sticky problems of contemporary feminism. I still, to this day, don't know what the right answer is.
I'll give you an answer. I've seen this all my life. Why was it in college that all of the meltdowns happened in the women's dorms, much less so than the guys' dorms? It didn't mean that guys didn't have conflict. Men address each other physically. And it's really easy to draw a line around violence because violence is very easy to track. As soon as I shove or hit or anything like that, a line has been crossed, and we can all recognize the line. The line is fairly easy to police. We can deal with that. Women fight reputationally, and there's near infinite ways to fight reputationally. And it is so hard to know the motivation or anything like that. You're just going to be far harder in terms of dealing with this. And so I as a pastor, a regular part of being a pastor is to address conflict between church members. The vast majority of that conflict has been, in my experience, between women. And it's far harder to deal with. Between men have conflict too, but doesn't seem to go like it goes with women. It's been my experience.
I don't know that I should have done anything differently, but it feels like I failed because I couldn't find the perfect feminist compromise.
Meanwhile, if there were a man at a conference holding a baby, that would go viral for "Look at the good father."
Look at the good father. You're right.
It would. But I think it's interesting that, even this expectation that you, Leigh Stein, were going to find the perfect feminist compromise, the perfect woman's compromise. Like, what is it about?
You don't get that in religious systems because you have, to a certain degree, the humility and the mystery built into the religious system already. Now, without that, we've got to fix it right now. Oh, do you think we can? Color me skeptical.
Women, that there's this expectation, and you see this not just, when people are like battling about what the rules are going to be at a convention, but also in terms of what we expect, like influencers or brands
or knitting bloggers,
right, to do for us. There's this expectation that women are going to.
So once you're outside, once sort of the religious thing has broken out of the religious container, the religious institution, now everybody needs to be an expert on building the perfect thing.
Always step in and always listen and always nurture everybody's, hurt feelings, basically. I just wonder, is it just that like people want these brands to be their mom, basically? That like there's, it's like
an expectation of caregiving.
Yeah.
Well, not just caregiving, but these brands are supposed to save us. Just watch what we do in commercials. These brands, your life is great. Everything should be wonderful, except this one thing. If you only have an Apple computer instead of that lousy Windows machine, heaven and earth open, and here we are, and the angels come down and sing.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
I am a former babysitter as well, so that's also part of my identity.
Ooh, I too used to sit
I think I'm out of time. Anyway, the whole thing was a great video. Hope the commentary was helpful. Very, very interesting stuff.